Hey, welcome to the show. Molly here. Wanted to make a video. It's been a while about going to Ripple Swell in New York this week and some of the other kind of rabbit holes that I've been in lately because I've been a little bit quiet for quite a few months. And that was for a reason, and I'll explain that to you in a second. All right, so this past week I went to New York for Ripple Swell as my first time going. Quite a few people that I hung out with there have been before. So it is kind of open to people in the financial services and kind of related industry. And I went as Vallow Capital, and it was quite an incredible experience. It was a 2 full days plus an event the night before. Everything was first class. The food was incredible. The venue, the first night where they had the welcome sort of party, welcome reception, was on the 101st floor of this building in kind of West Midtown called Hudson Yards. And it started pretty early at like 4 o'clock. I got there around 4:30. And because of the time change, sunset in Manhattan is at 4:50. And so we were there to watch one of the most spectacular sunsets I've ever seen. Because when you're up that high, looking west over Manhattan and the Hudson River, New Jersey, it just was stunningly beautiful. So it was quite an incredible place to have this welcome reception. I knew quite a few people there, a lot of XRP Army peeps who go to the Vegas events and other things that I've been to were there, but it was predominantly an industry event. It appeared like most of the people there come from finance or banking or kind of a corporate role that touches on finance or banking. And so that's a little bit of a different crowd that I'm used to going to events for. But there was a couple of noteworthy things that I want to express. And I'll tell you more about the actual event itself. But there was several times when I was in the sessions listening to the presenters where I felt like I'd woken up in an alternate universe and I'm on like a new timeline, because having been in this space for several years and having made videos about some of the topics that were discussed on stage, like a couple of years ago, you would have been called a conspiracy theorist if you speculated that at one point in the future, major banks like Citibank and Fidelity and Franklin Templeton would be on stage at a Ripple event speaking about all of their plans to use tokenization and kind of blockchain technology to run their businesses. And to listen to these very senior people at these large corporations, these mostly kind of banking type institutions, talk about this so matter-of-factly after years of speculating if this was the direction we were going in and kind of getting a lot of heat from people on Twitter and YouTube about that. It was just surreal to listen to these professionals just talk about these plans as if it was sort of like no big deal almost. And a couple other things that I found noteworthy. One was there was two different individuals, one of whom is the CEO of NASDAQ, who in talking about sort of flow of money and using crypto blockchain digital assets in their business. I mean, the plan is to tokenize all the stocks on NASDAQ. I assume New York Stock Exchange and other stock exchanges will do the same thing. There's this kind of question about, well, you have this sort of blockchain money world, but then we have this sort of traditional old school rails. Now, people in crypto will talk about that as fiat versus crypto. And if you look into the origins of the label fiat, it could be considered a derogatory term to talk about sort of traditional sovereign currencies as fiat, because that word means like by decree, right? Like the king has stated that this is so, this is our money, and not necessarily having it backed by anything of value. And so this is a debatable point. It's an interesting topic, the use of the label fiat. I have crypto people use that pretty regularly. It's not a big deal, but you don't generally hear institutional finance people use that label, or I hadn't until this event. Now, granted, many of them don't speak publicly often about crypto stuff, and I haven't been to any of those, I don't go to a whole lot of events. So that was a surprise for me. And the reason I got flagged in my mind as being a derogatory term is there's an economist whose book I have. He's a professor, I think, at Columbia. His name's Perry something. I can't look it up right now. And I've watched quite a few of his videos. You can watch them online talking about traditional finance. And has a very different view of economics and monetary policy than I have. He aligns with the establishment, let's just say. And he has spoken in some of these videos about he does not use the word fiat. He finds it to be misrepresentative and almost kind of like a derogatory term. So it kind of flagged in the back of my mind that traditional finance people generally don't use that word. And it came up a couple of times at this conference with speakers on stage referring to kind of, off-chain dollars as fiat currency. So that was one of my first, am I in a different world here, that all of a sudden the traditional institutional finance world has adopted crypto jargon and it's one thing to be a traditional corporate finance person and say things in a private meeting internally, right? It is a very different thing to say things on stage. They're all recorded. They all could be shared across the internet. So I don't think that was done accidentally. I think they have adopted that vernacular. So that was the first kind of, where are we kind of a thing. The second thing was, I didn't even notice it in the beginning. So the event itself was on the 24th floor of this building, the same one that the reception was on. And there was kind of this main speaking room, and then back kind of off down the hallway was another large area where you could chit chat and network with people. So if you wanted to have meetings while the sessions were going on, there was a place for you to do that. And on the side of this room was a display, kind of an island in the middle of the room that had a little bit of a museum setup of the history of crypto and that kind of a thing. I had a meeting in this room and didn't even notice this. I guess I was very distracted and present in my meeting and wasn't really paying attention to the decor in there. But while the next day I'm in the session and I see somebody posting a picture of this evergreen shipping container boat and saying that this was at Ripple Swell, and I'm like, but I'm here. So I'm like, I'm here. I'm going to go check it out. So I went and left the session. Now, this was on day 2, and the morning session was with Brad Garlinghouse and Patrick Witt, who is a digital assets advocate within the Trump administration. He's had several different roles over the time. He gets crypto. He understands what's going on. And for Brad Garlinghouse to interview him, clearly there's alignment there between Ripple and the Trump administration, which we already knew from the photos of Brad Garlinghouse and Stuart Alderati at the White House months ago. So after Patrick Witt's remarks, I go and check out this side room, and I see this kind of island. And on one side, you kind of go around in order. There are 2 pizza boxes that are stacked on top of each other. And it mentions that the early, the first sort of Bitcoin transaction that is kind of talked about publicly is this guy who bought a couple of pizzas using a bunch of Bitcoin, and how silly that would be because of its value now. And so that's a well-known accolade, or well-known story in the crypto world, especially if you've spent 5 minutes on the history of Bitcoin. And then around the table on the other side is this shipping container, like a model boat. That's, I don't know, a 1.5 feet long. And the note next to it, why was this thing there, talked about how the shipping container was a massive kind of efficiency in the global supply chain. And instead of shipping, all things individually, now you kind of had this economy of scale and you could fit a whole lot of things. And the shipping container is standardized so that you could stack them all up. It's not like each shipping company has a different sized shipping container, meaning there wouldn't be kind of interoperable or sort of compatible. And that's an excellent analogy for why standards, if you get into the ISO 2022 thing, why industry standards are very helpful for efficiency, because things then fit nicely together. And looking at a stacked shipping container model boat explains that well. And there are many, many shipping container barges in the world. I don't know how many, but I'm going to make a guess. Hundreds at a minimum. And the one that they used as an example has evergreen on it. And I'm going to put a picture in here of that. And that is, if you've been in the sort of red pill crypto world, red pill kind of awakening world, which a lot of XRP enthusiasts are. If you're watching this video, you probably are going to know what I'm talking about. I think it was actually during 2020, there was a large shipping container with the name Evergreen that was kind of stuck. I think it was in the Suez Canal for a long period of time. And there was a lot of questions about trafficking, human trafficking, and that ship. And it became known at that time that, the Secret Service has, kind of code names for all of the, high profile people like presidents and first ladies that they are assigned to guard. And Hillary Clinton's name is evergreen in the Secret Service. And so it was an interesting coincidence that this shipping container with ties to some sort of suspicious things that she has been tied to, and especially when she was at the State Department. I mean, there's a whole lot of rabbit holes that connect these dots. Now, and this was traditionally, in my opinion, viewed as like a fringe topic of conversation, one that, was more suited to Telegram and, Rumble than necessarily YouTube and Twitter, and generally wouldn't be the type of topic to come up at a corporate event with a bunch of bankers on stage. And, it's funny, I was reluctant to even make a video about this because I was like, I always want to stay on Ripple's good side. I have a tremendous amount of respect for them and had a fantastic time at the event. But I'm like, but wait a minute, they chose to have this display there and they chose to have this evergreen boat. And they could have easily made that same point about efficiency in the shipping world without putting the name evergreen on there. They could have also talked about early Bitcoin things without having the pizza boxes right next to it. So again, the pizza box thing is known in this same kind of world that looked into a lot of organized crime behavior among kind of elites of the world. And pizza and hot dogs have symbolic meaning that are not good. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, this is a rabbit hole you may want to consider, but I do want to warn you, it is not a happy, good one. It is a very sad, dark one. And it was just an interesting coincidence to have this shipping container that had a whole lot of chatter about who was being shipped on this boat, and the pizza boxes right next to each other. To have this at this kind of corporate fintech event with a bunch of very institutional mainstream financial services clients, high profile ones, it was just a kind of a bold move. And so after having seen Patrick Witt and kind of in my mind seeing, Ripple and Brad Garlinghouse very aligned with the Trump administration, going into this room and seeing this display, my first worry was a fearful one of like, wait a minute, like, am I on the wrong side here? Like, what's going on? And then I was reminded and saw some posts on Twitter that a lot of things are revealed to people who understand them and not kind of blasted in a very literal sense, because not everybody is ready to learn the truth about what the pizza and hot dogs mean, right? And so if you can handle that, then you will probably go down that rabbit hole. If you can't handle that part of history, and whether or not it's true or not, like, it's probably going to be a difficult topic for you to go down. So I was fascinated with the fact that they had this evergreen display there, considering it's kind of a controversial fringe topic. But again, it was off in the corner unless you sort of went out of your way to look at it, so it wasn't there right when you walked in your face. It was kind of, hidden from sight a little bit, but I wouldn't have even noticed it if someone else hadn't posted on Twitter that they had seen this thing. So that was the second kind of shocker thing. Then the third one too, which wasn't as big of a deal, but it was interesting to hear, again, on stage, Brad Garlinghouse referred to kind of the red pill, blue pill matrix analogy and asking, about when people took the red pill. And so again, a couple of years ago, when we were first kind of going down this journey of understanding, what is Ripple's role in this new financial system, who created this technology, where did it come from? A lot of these conversations about the Matrix and whether or not the Matrix is a documentary, those were considered these fringe topics. So to be on stage, or to see leaders on stage at Swell discuss a lot of these things like fiat currencies and red pill, blue pill in a very nonchalant manner while the evergreen model boat was in the other room, I just was like, this is so strange. Like if I had sort of had a clairvoyant vision a couple of years ago that this would be the state of affairs, I might have been skeptical about whether that was, possible. And so I feel like things have really changed. We are in a very different world now. And it was wonderful to be at this incredibly high-end fancy event where the optimism and the excitement was there. And it was different than XRP Vegas, where there's a whole lot of cheering and hooting and hollering, all that stuff. This was a little more quiet and refined, which you would expect with a sort of a finance crowd. They generally are not the stand on the tables and cheering type of person. Maybe they are behind closed doors, but generally not at industry events. But there still was this enthusiasm that wouldn't have expected to normally see at a financial event like this. So that was pretty amazing. Then the last night was, now in terms of like, were there any real revelations? I mean, not really. Like, a lot of the speakers kind of spoke about what their companies were doing, incorporating blockchain technology into their sort of movement of money and tokenizing assets. And that, to me, are things that many of us have been discussing for years. So it was more validating to hear like what we thought was going to happen is happening, and like how exciting is that. So I mean, there were some announcements about the acquisition of Palisades while we were there, and this $500 million investment from Citadel and Fortress, which again shows that this kind of traditional world and sort of what we call the crypto world are starting to merge. One of the early kind of topics we would debate and discuss was whether or not kind of the old financial system was going to collapse and be replaced by this new one. And I don't think that's the case. We're sort of seeing that there's going to be a merging and an alignment. In the same way, there's so many parallels between what's happening now with blockchain and money to the internet and industries like retail, e-commerce. When the internet first started, I was working in that industry, and there was a whole lot of skepticism about how many sectors the internet would actually kind of cover. And I remember having debates with people about whether or not anyone would ever buy shoes on the internet, and how you have to try shoes on. Why would you ever do that when you could just go to a shoe store and know if it's going to fit you? And we see that, there's so many categories of things that seemed unlikely to be internet dominated back in the day that now we just sort of take that for granted. Like, it's rare that I even go to a shoe store. I just sort of buy them online. If they don't fit, I return them, kind of a thing. It's not that big of a deal. And I think the movement of funds using digital assets and blockchain technology is going to be similar. And I think there's going to be changes to business models and how you pay companies because of this technology that we can't even really envision at this time, because they just seem too different from the status quo. But I think we're going to see a similar kind of shifting. So for example, if you rent a hotel room right now, you sort of pay for 24 hours. And if you kind of rent an apartment, you pay monthly. If you have your cell phone bill, you pay monthly. And that's because it's impractical logistically to be billing people at smaller amounts of time. So with crypto technology and blockchain technology and smart contracts, I mean, you could just have different models where you bill people every minute. You could rent things for much shorter amounts of time and have all of that billing be automated. And that's going to change the way businesses kind of set up relationships with customers. And it's amazing to see that the financial services industry is behind this technology, and they're generally the ones who behind the scenes are kind of managing a lot of the flow of funds. MasterCard has also come out with some very pro XRP relationships and announcements, and credit cards that are now supporting kind of that asset. And it seems unlikely to me that you would be giving kind of XRP as a rewards on a credit card if you didn't believe that technology had utility and adoption potential across the wider industry. So again, I don't think any of the announcements that I heard on stage, and I went to every session, were shocking. It much was validating and confirming things that we had discussed as sort of fringe topics the last couple of years, and now to see them confirmed on stage publicly by senior representatives of major financial institutions, that takes away the chatter that this is all kind of a made-up hopium type thing. And as I was flying home, there was a lot of debate and chatter among the sort of Bitcoin maxis of the world about this $500 million investment and the valuation of Ripple, and a lot of kind of quite harsh criticisms of Ripple that don't even make any sense about, what does the company actually do, and is its value just based on the XRP that's in the escrow. And you could see that people who are outside of the XRP Ripple world, kind of looking in, they don't get it, and there's a lot of resistance and fear. And none of that was part of the Swell event. Everyone was excited and optimistic. And if you doubt whether Ripple has a role in the financial system, you should have been at Swell, because there's a lot of very large, significant players there speaking on stage at the event, which you wouldn't do if you weren't aligned with what Ripple was looking to accomplish. And as Ripple continues to expand and be this kind of very full service suite of offers for the institutional finance world. One thing that Brad Kimes and I used to discuss when we would do the show inside of his mastermind was, could Ripple become the new U.S. central bank? And that seemed again like this fringe conspiracy theory topic years ago. I mean, a lot of it's lining up. They're really looking to be similar in scope to something like a BlackRock. Sorry, my dog is chewing on this bone and he's now got it pushed up against the wall. So I apologize if it's making any noise. Hopefully he'll move and do something else in a second. So as we see that Ripple has really kind of grown into this more full service suite of products, it's wonderful to have that confirmed by the industry professionals who were on stage to speak of them. Okay, I've hammered that point home. All right, community night was the last night. So if you went to the proper party in New York in September, not this past September, so like a year and a couple months ago, Ripple threw a wonderfully swanky, fun party that was free to those who registered, and Lenny Kravitz sang. It was quite a shindig. It was really, I think, to acknowledge and celebrate the end of that lawsuit with the SEC and to confirm that Ripple really appreciates the love and the support of the XRP Army, and that was a way to kind of show them again. And the community night, which was a similar party to the proper party, and that it was kind of at an offsite venue, free drinks, free food, really cool decor, and Brad Garlinghouse and David Schwartz came, was along with some other Ripple people that were there. And you could again feel that Ripple treats the retail investor community with a lot of love, and none of us are none of the retail investors are really going to be users, direct clients of Ripple. They're institutional finance, they're B2B, but they have this raving evangelical love from this retail investor community called XRP Army, of which I'm a proud member. And it's wonderful to see Ripple acknowledge that and host parties for the community where, we're not their target market. Like generally, corporate companies in that space don't do that kind of thing. And so I think it's incredible and amazing that Ripple does that. And they put their money where their mouth is. They throw these events. Their leaders, who are very busy people, take time out to spend time with the retail community. And, you don't see Larry Fink doing this kind of thing. You don't see the head of Citadel or see these other sort of institutions, Goldman Sachs. I don't even know who the head of Goldman Sachs is, and they're certainly not probably throwing parties for the general public to attend to show their love for the Goldman Sachs leadership. So I'm just picking those as random examples. Ripple's really done an incredible job kind of repaying or acknowledging the love that the XRP Army has for Ripple and the support they had, especially during the long years of the lawsuit. So that is what my recap is of Swell. It was an amazing time. I got to see so many friends that I've now hung out with at events over and over. Desiree Marino and I probably spent most of the time together. She worked at Citibank and was there as an attendee. And wonderful time hanging out with you, my friend. It was wonderful. And Ray Fuentes had a party the first night that had a cool panel. I posted some pictures on Twitter about that. So it's good to hang with him and Bill Stellan. Bradford O'Neill also came later on. Got to hang with James Rule a bunch. Always nice to see him. And Chip from On the Chain. Yeah, I had a really fun time hanging with people. Boone, always a pleasure to hang out with you. I know we'll end up working together more closely soon. It was a lot of fun. So why have I not been making other videos lately? Because I've been really in a lot of ancient mythology, symbolism languages, the history of banking topics. I'm not exactly sure why I'm learning all this stuff and studying it, which is why I've been reluctant to make videos about sort of the Anunnaki mythology and what exactly did the Knights Templar do and what is the Ark of the Covenant. These are things that are of interest to me, and I keep uncovering one breadcrumb and it takes me to the next one. And these are fascinating topics. And when I first started this YouTube channel, one of the reasons I did it was when I'm learning about some kind of economic topic or financial topic, one way that I can learn it more deeply is to learn with the intention of teaching, because you have to really understand something well to be able to explain it to somebody else in very simple language. I used to use this as a litmus test as a manager of analysts when I wanted to know if they understood things. It was like, if you can explain whatever concept to a child using very simple language, then you understand it. Where in the corporate world, I kind of grew up in the .com industry, which loved jargon so much. There was all these people who, when they would explain something, what their company does or what their products are, they would have so much jargon that you're like, I don't know what those words mean in English. You've given them meaning in your industry as sort of jargony, stuff, and a lot of acronyms and that kind of thing. And we see that in the financial services world as well. And so anyway, I was making videos with the intention of me being able to understand them more deeply, and if I can explain them to other people in simple language, then it kind of confirms to me that I actually understand them. And so with this kind of ancient mythology, Egyptian mythology, Sumerian stuff, I don't know if my intention is to teach other people, because it's one of these very obscure rabbit holes that when I do bring it up in conversation randomly with people, not associated with sort of crypto or XRP or anything, they kind of look at me like I have two heads and I'm just insane. And so I'm a little hesitant to make videos where the comments are just going to be like, are you absolutely insane? It also does, the rabbit holes I've been in, they really challenge a lot of interpretations of Old Testament stories. And I think it's interesting to be able to maybe say, let's look at the story of Genesis from this different lens. And I enjoy being able to have that open conversation where there are some people who are so committed to their views on things, they cannot and will not entertain an alternate viewpoint. And so sometimes I'm like, what's the point of having to have a conversation where I'm watching this person melt down? I mean, my favorite litmus test to determine if someone is open-minded or not, just be aware of this if I ever meet you in person and I ask you this is what I'm trying to do, is before I kind of get into any more obscure topics, I will bring up flat Earth. And I do not know if the Earth is flat. I do not know if there's a firmament. I do not know if the Earth is a sphere or a torus donut-shaped thing. However, I can and will happily have a discussion about the different sides of these viewpoints in a very non-emotional, non-defensive way until I can go to space, or I don't even know how to confirm it. So at this point, we're just discussing and debating various kind of data points that are available, and who do we want to believe, who do we not want to believe. And what shocks me quite regularly is there are people who cannot and will not even have this conversation. They kind of start to melt down and panic, change the subject, usually start accusing me, start calling me names. And I'm like, I don't know the answer to this question, but if you can't have this discussion with me without losing your mind, then I'm probably not going to get into the history of the Anunnaki with you and the Knights Templar banking system and what exactly is the Ark of the Covenant, because those questions and topics I think some people just aren't able to have, and that's one of the reasons why I haven't been making videos about that stuff, because I don't always know if it's worth all the heat and the aggravation that I get in response, particularly because I'm not necessarily advocating any of those viewpoints. Like, if I were to make a video about flat Earth, which I'm not going to do, it would be interpreted as that is my position on the topic, and I'm now an advocate for flat Earth theory, which is not true at all. So it's a little bit easier to make just videos about the Triffin dilemma, because it's really just an economic theory that I'm explaining to people. I'm not sort of advocating that, I do think the Triffin dilemma makes a lot of sense. That's probably, for example. But if I were to make videos about flat Earth, people would interpret that as my position on the topic, which it's not. And that's often what happens when I bring it up with people who can't have the discussion. They start accusing me of having this viewpoint. I'm like, I'm just telling you that I wanted to talk about it. So that's why I've been a little bit silent for a while with some of these topics, is they are a little bit more fringe and esoteric, and I'm studying them and learning about them out of curiosity and not with the intention of trying to convince anyone else that I'm right by any means. And so that's why I've been a little bit chit-chatty quiet on that stuff. But I made a video a long time ago about the Titanic, and that is still always one of my favorite kind of rabbit holes to go down. And when I sort of think about these big ships, the whole Evergreen thing just came back about how, one day we're going to find out the truth, I hope, about the Titanic and what was it the Olympic who sunk, JP Morgan's role, was it really sunk intentionally? And seeing this evergreen thing at the Ripple event kind of brought that back to my mind about these sort of large boats, and the Lusitania is another one, about their role in history and whether or not some of the speculative sort of more fringe theories that we've had about these things, whether we'll ever find out the truth about them. And I guess we have to wait and see. So there's my recap on Swell. Hopefully this wasn't too annoying with lots of rambling. But if you do have the opportunity to go to a Ripple event, I highly recommend it. They're absolutely wonderfully run, very professional. Everybody I meet at Ripple is just a delight to talk to, and very kind and patient. Although we did at the community night, I had a few drinks by then. There was a Ripple employee there who I did ask him if we could talk to him about the evergreen boat thing, and he was like, "Yeah, I can't do that." So I think there are sort of these communication things. I mean, the whole bearable guy thing, who that really is, and David Schwartz's coded messages, it's fun to speculate about them, but I have yet to actually get a Ripple employee to disclose anything, So hopefully that will come out again one day soon. So, all right, I'll see you in the next one.